You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy. All right, so this is our first episode of 2025. I feel like we're probably a few weeks overdue on making this episode, but I think this is probably the best we've ever done during the holidays of actually unplugging. So here we are doing an MPL Awards show
Better
the
late than
first
never.
week of 2025. Sorry, what was that, Steven?
Better late than never.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we made up like 4 or 5 awards, and each of us are going to pick an award winner for each category. And we thought this would be fun. So we're trying this out. Maybe this will be an annual tradition going forward. So let's start with good news stories. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you can go first.
So I have a lot of good news. I guess I'll start with personal. Like, what a holiday break. I mean, 2 college football playoff games for Texas. You know, if you're watching the video, I'm wearing my Texas hat. I've probably been wearing it almost every day. This is like, the best time ever to be a Texas football fan. 2 straight years making the playoffs. What else? Spent a lot of time with my family. Had some friends in town. Shout out to Ahmad that I rarely get to see, and it was nice seeing them here in town. And then we threw a New Year's Eve party that Steven and Sarah got to come to, so that was a lot of fun. And
that was fun.
I guess like the last thing, Tori, my wife, popped here in the last like 3 or 4 weeks, and she's got a little belly now, and it's exciting. Baby Huerta's coming. He's coming fast. Or sorry, she's coming fast.
I was gonna.
So that's my personal good news. A lot of good news. On the work front, I'm really pumped for MPL Live Boston. Like, we've done pretty minimal promotion of MPL Live at this point, and the fact that we already have, I don't know what the number is, but we have like at least like 15, 20 people that have already bought tickets. That's awesome. Like, we were expecting probably 80 to 100, and being 2 months out and not having promoted the thing and to see people already excited to go is great news for us. And I attribute that to Boston just having a super high density of top tier people leaders. And in our data, our modern people leader data, we have the 3rd biggest following city-wise in Boston.
Damn.
Which was like surprising, but not, because we've had so many amazing guests from Boston. So all that to say, I'm very excited for MPL Live Boston. If you live there or close to Boston and you haven't bought your ticket, you should go do that now. But yeah, that's my work good news. What do you got?
Well, that is all good news. For me, well, first of all, I think it's super exciting that Tori's showing, and that the baby reality is sinking in more and more and more. That has to be one of the biggest future highlights for MPL 2025 is baby Lena joining us, and that will be super, super exciting. So
MPL babies.
MPL babies, yeah. And I guess I'll start
some onesies, some swag.
for sure. I think that is a good segue into personal. I'll start with personal for me. And so, I think my good news, dude, 2024 is over. Like that, it just felt like a brutal year. It was a good year. News. No, I mean, it's over. It's behind us. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I'm talking more from a personal perspective, because it just seemed like it was a brutal year. That said, 2025 is, I've got a lot of cautious optimism, I think is the right description. And really on the work side, it's more, that's where, or like just the world in general, it's a little more cautious, but personally, tons of optimism. And so I'm getting married this year, and we are going to likely, I was laughing for good reason when you mentioned MPL onesies, because, Sarah and I are going to be, trying to build our family as well this year. And so I think the optimism it kind of cascades into a lot of different aspects of my life. And, that's super exciting. And I think work-wise, there is equal optimism in that, I think as a business, 2024 was amazing, and our audience continues to grow. All of the podcast core metrics continue to improve. Like we just reviewed those again today. We product-wise, to think that last year at this stage in the game, we really had one product, and it was like the standard. It was built around the podcast, which has been our bread and butter for all these years. And now to think that our products include consulting, it includes live events, it includes what will be our first business to consumer offering, our first offering direct to HR leaders, which is coming down the pipeline soon. And you'll hear us talking more about that with MPL Academy. And so many reasons, so much good news. But I think for me, it's the optimism, coming full circle. I felt like 2024 was difficult, and it was exhausting in many ways. And to have been able to hit reset and get some rest, to relax over the holidays, I'm coming into 2025 with a lot of optimism.
I was joking with Tori the other day that we were going to have bed sores because we had just been like vegging out in bed, binge watching TV shows the last like week or so. So I am fully rested, and I'm very excited for 2025.
Same.
Like, yeah, there's some good stuff coming. So let's get into the awards.
But I've said, and I will continue to say, that it all starts and ends with the pod. And so I think that's what we're talking about today. We're looking back on 2024. We had some sick like when we think about, when you're in the content business, it can get easy to just go through the motions. You're cranking out content. It's all exciting. You wouldn't do this for as many years as we've done it if we didn't love it. But man, when we sat back and looked at, who the conversations we had last year, we had some truly amazing guests.
Yeah. And that's why I think today's going to be so fun. And I guess like classic Daniel and Steven fashion, I have like all of these notes of like, who won each award and why they won. And Steven, I know you're kind of just going.
I literally have a name. I literally have a name, and I'm like, you know what? This is where I'm going.
But I think that's what makes this great. So the first category, or the first award that we're giving out, is the CEO Whisperer.
Okay.
And so something we've been talking. Yeah, I mean, this is like, we talk about this in the show almost every episode, and it's clear which chief people officers like actually have that homie or like that like really tight-knit relationship with their CEO, and those are the ones that seem to be doing the best work. And so yeah, we thought this should definitely be an award. And yeah, Steven, do you want to go first? Like, who do you got? Who's on your list?
Yeah, so on my list, and I remember the recording with her, and just remember having a feeling of like, wow, that this was an amazing conversation. And so the person that I am selecting for the CEO Whisperer is Hannah Yardley. And the reason that, again, I just remember leaving Riverside, which is the platform we use to record these, and just thinking, wow, like we had talked to some other really big names, one of which I think maybe your CEO Whisperer for 2024. And I remember thinking, Hannah is just like on this. And for those of you that may not have listened to Hannah Yardley's episode, she's the CHRO at Achievers. And Achievers is an HR tech company that focuses on rewards and recognition. They're a big name. Like for many years, they were one of the OG kind of recognition providers out there. They're enterprise, big company. And for her to have the relationship that she has with the CEO of Achievers is really, really telling. The second thing that I remember from our conversation with Hannah is that an HR leader is a steward of an organization's greatest asset, and that's its people. And the ways that she mentioned connecting, like really driving the evangelism is, and I guess the elevating the people function within the employee experience. So much of what she shared with us came down to her relationship with the CEO, with her CEO. And the way that she described partnering with the CEO on some of the initiatives that are kind of driving this next level employee experience, it really came down to that, the partnership. And the way that she approached the relationship with her CEO is that she had three buckets. There was first bucket was CEO decisions. Like, these are major people decisions, and the buck really stops with the CEO. And so I love the fact that even though the CHRO is responsible for the employee experience and for the people function, there still are things that start with the top. And I love the fact that was like bucket one. Bucket two were these joint decisions between the CEO and CHRO. And then the third bucket that they had was between the CEO and all SLT members. And so just having and when we asked her what this relationship looked like, it was congruent in the sense that the examples that she gave us really articulated why we should believe that she has this great relationship with their CEO. So for me, there are a lot of other reasons, a lot of other really super memorable things about that conversation. But I think the clarity that she had just around decision making, because so much gets caught up. We talked a lot about how decisions can go sideways, particularly when the CEO and the CHRO aren't aligned. So hearing this, I guess, playbook for empowerment, what can the CEO run with? What can the CHRO run with? To me, was genius.
Yeah, that's a good one. For me, it's Brandon Samet. This guy, I mean, I don't want to throw around genius too much, but there's a handful of guests that we've had on that are just so clear in their thinking, and he's one of those guys. And so for him, the first time we had him on, I think was in 2023, and in that episode, he described how he builds bridges with his CEO. And in hindsight, looking back at how he described it, it's really like a discovery and solutioning process, much like a salesperson would do. So, the first thing he does is ask a bunch of questions, like what's keeping them up at night. And then once he understands that, he'll try to find common ground. So there's something that's high priority for him that's also high priority for his CEO. It's all right, let's start here. And then just like in a sales call, he'll play back everything that he's heard just to confirm, hey, this is what I'm hearing. And he'll describe it and he'll say, is that all accurate? And then from there, it's open for debate. They can debate the small details. And I think he said, as a CEO he once worked for likes to say, it's not about who's right, it's about what's right. And I think that's how every CPO and CEO should approach that relationship. And so that was the starting point of us getting to know Brandon. And so because it felt like he has mastered this relationship, we invited him back on the podcast. And we said, how about you come on with Wade, your CEO, and this will be our first ever CEO CPO podcast that we do. And so what stood out for me on that episode was not their current working relationship. That's great. But so yeah, that, that stood out to me. But I guess what also stood out to me, or I guess what really stood out to me, was the exercise that him and Wade went through before he ever joined the company. And so let me just go check my notes. He said, after a recent round of 360 feedback, I shared everything with Brandon, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I laid out the raw comments for complete transparency. And this is from Wade, the CEO. Wade explained that this was to show what working with him was like and to identify areas that weren't benefiting Zapier, asking Brandon for help in addressing these issues. In return, Brandon shared his own 360 feedback and readmes. They say this exchange rapidly accelerated their understanding of each other. And so they described what readmes were. And I guess like the other learning from this conversation is like these are green flags to look for from a CEO.
Yeah.
Like, we can sit here all day and say like, this is what you need to do to build a relationship with your CEO. And like, yes, there's some truth to that, but a lot of it just comes down to the person that you choose to go work for.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was probably like an all-timer episode for us. I wish we could have them back, but or I mean, we should bring back the CEO CPO episode format. I think that was a lot of fun.
We should. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is that earlier I mentioned the word cautiously optimistic just about the general world, and I use that because I don't, I think there are going to be aspects of 2025 that aren't going to feel better for HR leaders. And I think that, for example, at least in the conversations I'm having, HR budgets continue to remain extremely tight. And programs that might be deemed discretionary are going to be highly scrutinized. And I think that a relationship with the CEO, this topic is this muscle that HR leaders need to flex, is going to be a really, really important one this year.
Yeah. And I'm going to keep us rolling. So the next award that we have is the best hang.
Oh,
and again, like these were all just like totally made up awards, but the first person that came to mind for me was Hibba. Like I don't really remember like all the things that we talked about, but I just remember like feeling good, and it almost felt like she was interviewing us at some points of that chat. And so like, at one point we were talking about like our favorite snacks and how like she doesn't allow her husband to eat her snacks. I can't remember where the conversation went, but it just felt like we could have, hung out with her for another couple of hours, and we should definitely bring her back or go back on her podcast if she'll have us. But I don't know. It wasn't like so much what we talked about, just like how I felt spending that hour with her. And it also could have been the fact that I think we recorded on my 30th birthday. So I was just in a really good mood.
That helps.
Yeah, I'd either just gotten back from Miami or I was about to go to Miami. But yeah, Hibba, she's definitely the homie, and we're going to have her back in 2025.
I just love what Hibba does. I love how she does it. It's high quality content. She has her own perspective, like that, all the things that are the perfect recipe to be a best hang. For me, I'm going to go with Brené Brown, and that was an amazing, a huge occasion for us, like a huge guest to have on the show, dream guest. When we had looked over the course of the last 4 years, we've had a lot of like ideation and thought exercises around like if we could have anyone, who would we have on the show? And Brené was always on our list, and we were fortunate enough to have her on the show last year. And for me, the reason why it was such a great hang, I think so many people interview Brené and they obviously want to talk about her research. They want to talk about her books. They want to talk about her ideas and concepts and vulnerability and all the great things that Brené is known for. And it was so cool we did not choose that path. We actually chose to interview Brené, like ask her these tough questions and these tough concepts that she talks about on her podcast, etc. But like as the CEO of her Brené Brown Enterprises. And it was so cool to hear like the way she talked. Like she is as human as all of us are. And I think it's easy, especially with these thought leaders and experts, to forget that there's more than just the work. And with Brené, like that to me was why it was such a cool hang, such a memorable hang. But in addition to that, there are also so many things about our journey. Like I quit drinking 9 years ago. We have leveraged a lot of the same programs and approaches to life for self-improvement, all of these things. Like there are so many aspects of her story that I relate to dearly. And I think we all do. I think that's what was so cool about it for me is like everyone that has read a Brene Brown book or listened to a Brene Brown podcast, I feel like they feel like they're part of her story. It's so relatable. So then to have her on our show in our format, interviewing her in a different context, and also being able to share all these things, not to mention she is a UT, University of Texas alumni. So she's also a Longhorn fan, like so many intersection points. Hands down.
Say, like the before and after of the call too. I'm just remembering this. I don't know if she said this before the call or after the call, but she was like, there's who the people that hate me think I am, there's who the people that love me think I am, and then there's actually who I am. And I felt like I got a better slice of like, or a better understanding of who Brene is as an actual person.
Completely.
And turns out like she's like super nice and very generous. And then one last thing I wanted to say,
but also kind of curt, like also very like, very forthcoming to share her views, not all of which are what I would have just thought her view or kind of her perspective would have been. So
I feel like authentic is overused, but right now it's the best word that I can think of describing both Hiba and Brene.
For sure.
Like, we talked about hockey romances. Like, I didn't even know that was a genre of books for Hiba. Mm-hmm. And now every time I go to Target or I go to a bookstore, I see the section for that. I'm like, wow, like there's an actual genre dedicated to hockey romances.
This is going to sound really weird, but I find it very hard now to do squats and not think of Brene Brown because of her every day is leg day quote. Yeah. So,
oh, that's awesome. Okay, let's keep it going.
All right.
So the next one we have is the data hero. Pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, I mean, something that we've sort of, I guess, upon reflection, maybe like a couple of months ago, I tried to come up with like a formula for what makes an amazing Modern People Leader episode. And the way that I describe it on prep calls now is that every episode must have 2 of 3 elements. 1, really good stories. 2, compelling data. And 3, like it needs to be actionable. And so, like with Annie Dean's episode, it had all 3, but she brought the freaking data. Like they were doing, so they have a team called Team Anywhere, and there's a Team Anywhere lab, and their lab is constantly running experiments on work, whether it's a calendar redesign or like the ROI of real estate and like how much real estate they should have and like the numbers behind why, the optimal number of days with in-person time to drive connection across their business. They have data for all of that, like literally all of that. Like they were able to tell us, I'm just pulling it up. So for like the real estate, like I want to say they decreased their real estate by like 50% from what they had in 2019, or maybe it was even more. But they found that after they have in-person gatherings, so I'm guessing in their case it's probably offsites, that team connection goes up 37%. And then not only do they know that number, but they know that after 4 or 5 months it starts to go down. So every 4 or 5 months, they need to have like these big company-wide get-togethers.
That's the part that blew my mind. Is they also knew how that sense of connection, the rate at which the decay of that sense of connection, or how that sense of connection decreases over a period of time, and when you need to re-engage. Yeah, I just blew my mind.
And then the part that I think a lot of people loved, and I'm just going off of social engagement, but people really loved their calendar redesign experiment. So long story short, they found in the data that everybody was spending majority of their week in back-to-back 30-minute meetings. So they were like, all right, when is actual work happening? And so how can we redesign people's calendars to address this? So they had 2 groups. I think group 1 was instructed to keep 30% of their calendar free, dedicating around 10% of their time to focused work and 20% to open collaboration, which means that, they're still in a lot of meetings, but they're blocking off time for collaboration and focus time. Group B, they just had people every day talk to their manager about their most important task. So almost like a daily stand up in a way. But instead of having like 3 or 4 top rocks, it's like, what's your one top rock? Like if you could just accomplish one thing for today, what would it be? And across both groups, there was 31% increase in productivity, 13% reduction in meeting time, 67% of individual contributors felt like they were making more progress. 71% of managers felt like they were making more progress. And I think somebody ended up commenting like, well, out of the two groups, like which one should we go with? And I think the response that they got was like group B. So the group that basically had a top rock, they were the most productive and they reduced meeting time the most also. And it just goes to show like if you have ruthless prioritization and you're focused on the most important thing every day, like you can accomplish a lot. So Annie Dean's the data hero for me this year.
Dude, Annie is amazing. Atlassian, I love Atlassian.
And that's episode 149. I should have been calling out the episode numbers as we were going, but yeah, episode 149.
Yeah, love what Atlassian is doing and just have so much respect for the, when I remember leaving the conversation with Annie and it just brought me back to Dina Upton. And in peak pandemic, Dina, in our first interview with her, she was still at Drift and it was peak pandemic. And she was like, you got to find your edge, choose your edge, lean into your edge, and talk about leaning into your fucking edge. Like Atlassian, like has totally leaned into this remote working edge that they have, and just kudos all around to everyone involved in the work they're doing. For me, this one was another easy one, similar to the last one. For me, the Data Hero Award goes to Nick Bloom. Nick is a researcher at Stanford University, one of the only, if not the only, researcher that I'm aware of that had legit data on remote working and has been publishing, his research, his findings, since COVID really
and he has
kicked
like a pretty
off.
balanced view too.
Has a balanced view, and just, I don't know anyone in our space that doesn't respect the work that Nick is doing. And so I had chased him multiple times in the past to try to get him in the pod. He finally agreed to join us in 2024, which was amazing. And he didn't disappoint. Like in some of my, first of all, to have like the preeminent like remote working data guru on our researcher on our show is just like, again, mind-blowing to me. But the way that he contextualized the data that he had, because I think particularly last year, like it felt like with the pandemic, remote work just shot up. We'll talk about some of the numbers here in a second. And it's just been like a up and down situation, mainly down as we hit the end of 2024 and with more and more companies mandating that employees return to office. And so for me, it was not only what Nick shared with us, but he also contextualize the data in this, to your point, it was very balanced in the way that he shared the data, and he contextualized it he framed it as though like there's still a lot of open questions and the data isn't giving a lot of clear answers, but here's where the data is pointing to some really remarkable things. And just to think about how remote working changed, like the brief history of remote working post COVID, like before COVID, only 5% of workdays in North America were remote. In 2020, that skyrockets. So peak COVID, that skyrockets from 5% to 60%. And now, again, it's been up and down. And now, at least last year at the time that we interviewed Nick, the data has probably changed a little bit. We were around 25%, but that's still 5x of where it was pre-pandemic. And
you were considered like a weirdo before if you were working remote. Like, really? Like you're working from home? Like what?
oh
Like
yeah,
how?
exactly. It was like, who's this like this random random guy that pops or his or her head into whatever meeting, and then we never hear or see of them again. Like, yeah, I'll be honest, I had the same view, but now like everything's changed, and I think most people view remote work in a totally different light. And for 5x the number of pre-pandemic workers to be now working remotely is, to his point, that's 40 years of growth in 2 years, which is insane when you contextualize it that way. Return to office. Nick walked us through what the data said and how the data from multiple sources like swipe cards and cell phones painted a very different picture to what the media was portraying as like what the data was saying. And specifically, while dozens, hundreds of companies, I don't know exactly, lots of companies pivoted and went back on their decision to have a remote workforce. You know, the data, some of the data that Nick had access to did not support what the media is portraying, and or at least what some of you may think just looking at your LinkedIn feed. And the fact is that that number, the real number of people returning to the office, is arguably much lower than what headlines is saying. And how the way he walked us through the nuances in the tracking, the nuances in the reporting, the lags in some of this data, and the more you realize, like, we don't actually know, it's still unclear exactly where we're at. And the reality is probably not what the media is portraying. It's not what we think. It's probably somewhere in between.
Yeah. I love anytime that we have a guest that like embraces the nuances. Like it just makes me think of founder mode.
Yeah.
And what's the guy from YC? Is it Paul Graham? Is that his
Paul
name?
Graham, yeah, and Brian
It was like a
Chesky.
blog that he wrote about
Right.
this speech that Chesky did. And so I was really curious about that like a couple of weeks ago, and I went and listened to like a 50-minute YouTube video. I can't remember who Chesky was doing the interview with, but I guess as I remember it, Paul Graham was writing something. He wrote a blog about this like 4-hour impromptu speech that Chesky gave to YC founders, and it wasn't recorded. And so I think like even with things like that, like founder mode, like if you just read all the headlines about founder mode, you would think that like he was a dictator of Airbnb. And I don't know, like I even like had that kind of reaction when I was hearing about founder mode. And then when I listened to this 55-minute, 60-minute interview, I need to find it, maybe link it in the show notes. Really what he's saying like isn't that crazy. That as the company got bigger, there were so many layers that it felt like there were a lot of people that like weren't doing solid work. And as more layers were added to the company, he became more disconnected from what they were delivering product wise, and he got out of the details. And so all he was saying was that founders should still be involved in the details. And it's not saying they should micromanage, but I don't know, like it was just funny, like how that blog post went viral, and everybody had a bunch of hot takes about founder mode, but
Well,
like
and
it was more nuanced than that.
it's why I love this award to begin with, because there's so much in the HR world that gets sensationalized, and we talk about this a lot, but it's refreshing. I think it's important that we stay rooted in data. I think it's
Yeah,
going to be increasingly important that we stay rooted in data.
I agree. Well, cool, man. We got to keep it moving. The
I
Innovator,
think we got one more.
again, pretty self-explanatory. Every once in a while, we have somebody on the show that is doing something so different that we end up talking about it over and over again for the next few months. And for me, like this one was pretty easy. It was David Hanrahan. This guy just like probably sees the world differently, sees the people space differently. and he's not afraid to try new things. And so he first came onto the podcast earlier this year. I think that was like his second or third time coming onto the show. And he talked about team performance reviews and how he had, piloted this at Eventbrite, and they did it one way. And then when he moved to Flare, they did it a slightly different way. And I highly recommend going to check out that episode. It's episode 167. I won't get into all of the details, but just going from idea of, hey, like maybe the way that we're managing performance or thinking about like having a high performance organization is wrong. Like maybe it's less about the individuals and more about the team. And if so, if that is correct, like how do we find a way of measuring team performance? And so like it's very simple, but I don't know many other companies that do this. And I'm not going to get into all the details because we're running out of time. But again, like go check out that episode. But you can also check out episode 201 where he gives a follow up on the team performance reviews, and he also talks about like let me just pull up my notes from that one. But he dropped something else on there that was like pretty different. So let me see. He talked about I cut it from the newsletter, but one thing he talks about is like the motivational pie chart. And I don't know what book he got this from, or if he read like a blog about this, or if
I
this
think
is
he
like
borrowed it.
a
I think he
Hannah
borrowed it from
Handism.
someone.
You think so?
Yeah, I remember him telling us.
But yeah, like go check it out. It's just like his way of thinking about compensation. And I mean, I'm sure we could ask him about like any facet of HR, and he'd probably have a very different way of thinking about it. And so, when you have people like Steve Cadigan reaching out to us and saying like this guy's the future of HR, like there's a reason for that. So that's my innovator of the year.
I love it. And, I think innovation happens in a variety of different ways, right? There is like cutting edge innovation, there's operational innovations happening all the time, product innovations. And so for me, I'm choosing someone who brought more operational. If like David was really pushing the boundaries and kind of thought leadership and tackling old problems in new ways, the person I'm choosing was more kind of operationally focused in the innovation, but definitely qualifies as one of our episodes that we referred to in the months after. For several months, 3 or 4 months, we kept talking about this episode, and it's Melanie Rosenwasser from Dropbox. And for me, the level of detail that Melanie and her HR team had kind of thought through how to take this virtual first working model and really create a foundation where everyone can succeed, and then share with us at an extremely detailed level how they're pulling it off, not just from like how they define the work, how they use office space, when to meet in person, the notion of async first, but also like how the team is measuring the impact as well. And that is like, I think we've seen a lot. Some people are good at documenting the impact and kind of selling that. We talked about Atlassian, all the research and reporting that's come out of their initiative, but then the operational framework as well is what Melanie kind of shared with us. It really stood out. And I think it really resonated with our audience. I can't tell you how many people, I had requests to introduce network contacts to Melanie. Like people came, they really wanted to talk to her. And I think it comes back to the innovative approach that her and her team have taken to deal with this. And almost all companies had their struggles last year. And Melanie was very candid with us. Like, there were still things that they were working through. But when I think about innovation, again, particularly on the operational side, like the fact that she both shared the framework and she shared with us how they're measuring success really just completed the package for me.
With that, I think we should move to one word close. Actually, one thing before we go to one word close. So, in the spirit of the Innovator Award, like, we want to innovate with how we do the podcast, and we know that the only way to do that is by asking for feedback from our listeners. So, we have a 5-question survey. It'll take you 2 minutes to fill out. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes. We'll probably also send it out via email. Maybe we'll include it in this week's newsletter with the awards. But we want your feedback. We don't want your feedback. We need your feedback because we know that we can make the show better, and we just need some ideas. Like, tell us what it is we need to change. Tell us what it is we need to stop doing. Like, be very frank with us, because we know that we're not going to make this podcast better for you unless we hear from you. So I'll drop a link to that in the show notes. And yeah, with that, let's go to one word close.
I'm going to go with optimism. It's where I started in my good news. And as we've kind of talked through our show awards for last year, it's optimism for me.
For me, this is more just like one word close for the day. So something that y'all don't know is that we had our 2025 planning session this morning, and the one, I guess, like the one word phrase that keeps coming to mind is like, I don't know the right way of putting this, but like, we have realistic goals. Like, it's the goals that we've set for ourselves in 2025 for MPL, like, they're very attainable. And I'm so excited for some of the guests that we're going to have on the show here in the next few months. Again, go fill out the survey. Like, if there are other people we should be talking to, tell us. We want to make this the best HR podcast in the world. And yeah, so that's...
Yeah, and as a teaser, just to build off of that, is what 2025, one of the key kind of mantra for us is getting back to the pod. Like, 2024 was about expanding our products, expanding our business, and we did a great job. And I think we're now both super excited about refocusing some time and energy to the podcast itself. And so your feedback is just going to be huge in helping us, determine how we're going to do that, how we're going to elevate the content for this year. So thank you in advance.
And with that, anything else you want to add? Are we good?
No, but yeah, I feel like every time we do these riffs, and I know it's been a long time since
we say this every single time.
We're like, guys, this is so easy. It's so much fun. We should do more of this. But yeah, that apart from that, I think we have a lot to be excited for this year. So
I agree. Well,
all right, my man.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.